Thanks, Vera.
Thanks, John. Many thanks for introduction. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Vera Murphy. I'm the Managing Director of Bevan Murphy Customs, which is a leading international trade and customs company, training and consultancy company. So I have over 35 years experience in global forwarding, customs regulations and supply chain. So that is enough about me. What we're going to focus on today is applying commodity codes, an introduction to what they are, how they're structured, the general rules of interpretation, and the reason I'm kind of going to focus in a fair amount on these is that when you go to classify something, you have to be bearing in mind the general rules of interpretation, and those guide you towards selecting the correct commodity codes, right? So we'll be going through what those general rules of interpretation are. How to request an opinion. So if you're not sure yourself, even if you've kind of gone through whichever database you're using, it might be the Northern Ireland Online Tariff, it might be the EU Tariff consultation. If you've gone through those, if you've looked at the general rules of interpretation and followed those, and you're still unsure as to what your commodity code is, there are ways that you can apply for support, right, and get an actual opinion from HMRC or from Revenue. And then there's the binding tariff indicator, which kind of gives you legal certainty for a period of 3 years that you have indeed selected the correct commodity code. Then we look at rules of origin. What is origin? What's the definition of it? And I have spelt preferential and non-preferential. I've spent the preferential and non-preferential origin incorrectly, but I know you know what I mean. And then whether there's two ways that origin can be obtained, and that's wholly obtained or sufficiently processed. Rules of origin. There are some general rules of origin that tend to apply across all trade agreements. Binding origin, and then proof of origin. And as John mentioned, we leave some time at the end for questions and answers. Okay, so what are commodity codes? They're used to classify goods in international trade. They are based on the global Harmonized System, the HS system, which is maintained by the World Customs Organization, and it's used in more than 200 countries worldwide. The purpose is to ensure that customs authorities can determine applicable customs duties, import-export controls, licensing requirements, trade defence measures, and statistical reporting. So before the harmonised system was in place, it would have been subjective, right? Because, you know, the producer would describe their goods differently to how a customs officer might describe those very same goods. So it was a very subjective process, which obviously would have led to a lot of misinterpretation. You know, so the reason behind the classification is that any customs officer around the world, any producer around the world, any importer can use a system for all of those countries, which is 200 countries, you know, worldwide, which are part of the World Customs Organization, to identify in the same way the same goods, right? So it's all about the systems when it comes to customs. So commodity codes classify their goods according to their objective characteristics. And these characteristics include material composition, function or use, manufacturing stage, and technical characteristics. So if you're asking HMRC or Revenue for an opinion, you give them that detail around the product, and from that they'll come back with an opinion. And I have a handy little slide in here, which you will be given access to afterwards, which shows you if you are requesting any kind of an opinion because you're not sure of the commodity code, then you can just use this, the information on the slide, complete that, and then send it to request an opinion from Revenue or from HMRC. So commodity codes follow a hierarchical structure. So the first 2 digits are the chapter, the first 4 digits are the heading, the first 6 digits are the subheading, and then 8 to 10 are tariff level, right? So the chapter is a very broad category. The heading is more specific to the product group. The subheading is the international classification. And then the tariff level is country region specific. So as you go through and more digits are added, you're becoming more and more specific as to what the product is, and the description of the product becomes more complete. So here's an example. The example is electrical machinery and equipment, and that comes in under chapter 85. And if you look, so that's the chapter 80, so the first two digits of the chapter, then the heading is the 8517. That becomes more specific again, in that it says the type of electrical machinery it is, so it's telephone and communication apparatus. Then we've got the 851762, which again is more specific. So it's telephone communication apparatus, and specifically it's machines for reception, conversion, and transmission of data. And then the 85176200 is the specific tariff classification. So the last part of it, so after the first 6 digits are the same in any country in the world, right? They're part of the Harmonized System. So any country that signed up to the World Customs Organization, which is most trading countries in the world, the first 6 digits will not change. So if you're bringing a product in from the US into Ireland and it's got the first 6 digits, they won't generally change, but the next 4 digits will change based on the 2 digits will be added at the European stage. So then that brings you up to 8 digits. And then another 2 digits will be added by Ireland, right? And if you look at commodity codes, the last 2 digits tend to be 00, 10, 20, 50, or 90, right? So that's added on then at a country by country level, the last 2 digits. There are generally 10 digits at the point of import. For Europe, it's normally 10 at the point of import and 8 at the point of export. For other countries, there can be more. Like, for example, for China, the standard amount of digits in a commodity code are 13. It can go up to 17. So that can change regionally, but the first 6 digits will remain the same. They're internationally harmonized. And then, as mentioned, the last 6 digits from a European perspective and from a UK perspective are added on at regional and at country level. So just to give you some classification examples, so the product is men's cotton shirts. The commodity code is 6205200, so that's the first 8 digits. So if we were importing that, there would be another 2 digits added onto that. So the breakdown again is 62, which is the chapter, and that's a very general description. It's articles of apparel and clothing accessories, not knitted. 6205, men's or boys' shirts. Then it gets a bit more specific as to who it's for. Its function. 620520, its material. It's of cotton. And 62052000 then is the specific tariff line, right? So the classification in that case is determined by the product type, the shirt. So 6205, the heading says it's a man or boy's shirt. The gender category, men's, boys. The material, cotton. If the shirt was made from synthetic fibers, it would fall under a different subheading. So when you're classifying goods, you can't just, if you see something with a shirt in it, a description that has, men's or boys' shirts, but your product is not of cotton, it happens to be of synthetic, then you need to do a deeper dive into, okay, what's the correct commodity code here for the particular product? And in general, it's whatever description matches your product most closely. So when you're classifying goods, if you choose a classification that is correct at a surface level, but there's another classification within the tariff, and remember there's over 10,000 commodity codes. There's another classification within the tariff that more specifically matches your product. You're choosing the wrong commodity code. You have to choose the one which most specifically matches your product. And there are three things, if you're ever audited, that will be focused on initially most closely, and that is classification, origin, and valuation. And the reason that classification is focused in on so specifically is because that determines all the rules and controls around importing and exporting your product. It determines the duty levels. It determines whether other government agencies need to be involved. So, for example, Department of Agriculture, Foods and Marines, the sea fisheries, etc., etc. The other, depending on your commodity code, there may be licenses required. For example, it might be dual use, which means that it could be suitable for both non-military and military use. So then there would be licensing requirements required to import or to export that. So the commodity code determines the licenses, the controls, the duty levels, the safety levels, and what other government agencies need to get involved with the import or export of that product, right? So it's taken very seriously if you get it wrong. And it might not be that you deliberately get it wrong. It's just that you went to the tariff and you chose the commodity code that seemed to be applicable at surface level, but there's another commodity code in the tariff that's actually more applicable, in which case that's the correct commodity code to use. So what are the general rules of interpretation, right? And what I just described is one of the general rules of interpretation. So it is, they are the harmonized system, the harmonized legal framework used worldwide to determine the correct classification of goods under the harmonized system. They ensure that goods are consistently and are classified consistently and objectively, regardless of the country where the goods are imported or exported. The rules are used by customs authorities globally and were developed by the World Customs Organizations. So why do the GRI rules exist? Many products could potentially fall under one or more commodity code. The GRI rules provide a step-by-step legal method to determine the correct classification. So that's what I just mentioned earlier. If your commodity code could fall under one or more classification, so you follow the GRIs then to make sure you're identifying the classification that is closest to what you're importing or exporting, and the GRI rules help customs authority decide which tariff heading applies, how to classify unfinished or composite goods, and how to classify sets or products made from multiple materials. Without these rules, commodity classification would be inconsistent and open to interpretation. And again, it's all about being objective, and because goods are being imported and exporting to and from multiple countries and across multiple customs jurisdictions, these rules are global rules, and they're the rules that the customs officer will use to determine whether or not you've used the correct commodity code in your particular product line and situation. I don't know why that's sticking, but it is. Sec. Okay, so an example of, I go through each general rule of interpretation and I apply, I give you examples of each, right? So example of GRI 1 is classification by heading description. So classification is determined by the terms of the headings and section chapter notes. So example of this is fresh apples. So if you went in and did a search on, you might be using the Tariff consultation or the UK Tariff or the Northern Ireland Tariff consultation, then if you did a search under apples, it would probably bring you up two possible headings, right? So the two possible headings have under completely different chapters. So the first one, 0808, apples, pears, and quinces, and then the second one is 2008, which is fruit otherwise prepared or preserved. So what you're doing is fresh apples. So in that case, the correct classification would be 0808, fresh apples. And the reason for that is the heading specifically covers fresh fruit, and prepared fruit only applies if the product is processed or preserved. So the next one, classification, general rules of interpretation, is the GRI2, and that's to do with incomplete or unassembled goods. So GRI, there's three in this, A, B, and C under GRI2, but GRI2A states that incomplete or assembled goods are classified as the finished product if they have the essential character. So the example used is a product unassembled bicycle shipped in a box. The possible headings are 8712 or 8714. So because it's a full bicycle shipped in a box, it's just that it's not assembled, then it would be the correct heading would be 8712 for the bicycles. So an example of GRI3, when goods could fit, another one on this GRI2, where you have, so say for example, if you were sending out say medical kits, and the kits were being sent to a third country to be a third country would be, if you're based in Ireland, it would be anywhere outside of the EU, and if you're based in the UK, would be anywhere outside of the UK, would be considered a third country. So if you were shipping goods to outside of whatever your customs jurisdiction is, that would be to a third country. So say if you were shipping medical kits, but the kit was unassembled and it was being sent to a third country to be assembled, then providing all the components that make up the finished kits are in the kit, then you would use the commodity code for the kit, right, for the completed kit. If any of those commodities were missing, then you would need to classify each of the goods within that kit separately and ship the products as individual components. Okay, so I mean, that can have enormous impact in terms of how much classification you need to do. I come across it a lot that over time, businesses might have started out shipping out unassembled kits where everything was part of the kit. So they were using, the commodity code for the full kit. But then over time, they might have outsourced more and more of the components that went into that kit to third countries, but they're still using the complete kit classification number to go when they're shipping the goods out, and that's actually incorrect. They should be classifying the goods on a component by component basis. It's basically if the officer, the customs officer, at the point of export, at the point of import, stopped that product, then could, based on all of the components in that kit, is everything in there for them to make up the finished product, right? So that's one of the questions you need to be asking yourself. So a GR3, when goods could fit multiple headings. So GR3 applies when goods appear to fall under more than one heading, and that can happen quite a lot, right? So in that case, the most specific description wins. So where that can be an issue for traders is that they go in, they look at the commodity code, they think they found the correct one, and then it stops there. And from then on, they classify their product under that commodity code, right? You need to check and make sure that there's no other commodity code that's more specific than the one that you're using. And an example of that, the GR3 rule would be chocolate covered biscuits, right? So the possible heading, so there's two, it's chocolate covered, but it's also a biscuit, right? So the heading for chocolate is 1806. The heading for biscuits is 1905. The correct classification is 1905 biscuits. And the reason for that is that the product is a biscuit containing chocolate, not chocolate itself, right? So the 1905 is more specific and more descriptive of what the product actually is, rather than just the 1806 chocolate. So GR3B, composite products. So when goods consist of different materials or components, classification is based on the essential character. So example product, a gift basket containing wine, cheese, and chocolates. So there are three possible headings there. It's wine, cheese, and chocolate. So what would be checked there is what is given the basket its essential character, and sometimes that can be how it's being marketed. So if the basket's been marketed mainly as a wine gift set, classification may be under wine, right? But you'd need to be able to back that up in terms of if you if you classified it under wine, or say, for example, you classified it under 1806 chocolate, and then it turned out there was two bottles of wine, or lots of wine in there, then if you were audited, you wouldn't be able to stand over that. So you need to be able to stand over, you need to base it on its essential character, but then you also need to be able to stand over why you see it as that essential character and why you chose it as that essential character. So GR3C, when classification cannot be determined by specificity or essential character under the general rules for interpretation of the Harmonized System, GRC applies when goods could fall under two or more headings, right? So GRI3, most specific description. So if the most specific description doesn't resolve the issue, and then the essential character in the example of the example of the biscuits was the most specific description. The example of the wine was the essential character cannot be exampled, cannot be determined. Then the goods are classified under the heading that appears last in numerical order. So an example of that is where that would be applicable is you have a mixed nut snack pack. The product is retail snack pack containing equal quantities of peanuts, almonds, and cashew nuts. So your possible headings in that case are cashew nuts, 0801, almonds, 0802, or peanuts, 1202, right? So each heading only covers one type of nut, so none of them are more specific. There's no essential character because the nuts are present in equal quantities and value. So you can't go by the essential character. So then the GRC3 applies. So you choose the heading that appears last in numerical order, right? So the heading, so there's 08, 08, they're in the same numerical order. Well, 0801 is first, and then 0802 is 2. So the peanuts are 12, starting with 12, 02. So they're the last numerically, so you choose that one, okay? Example of GR4, similar goods. If goods cannot be classified under previous rules, they're classified under the heading of goods more similar to them. I couldn't even come up, this is so rarely used that I couldn't even come up with an example for it. So a new product, so you can have new products. Like, for example, there's a lot of new functional foods coming on the market. There is no classification yet for them. So with something like that, I wouldn't even go ahead and try to use the general rules of interpretation. I would just go ahead and ask revenue or HMRC for an opinion on it, right? So I've never actually used the GR4 myself independently without going and getting an opinion on it. I might suggest that, look, I think it falls closely under, it's a new product, it hasn't been classified yet. I think it's very similar to this classification. But I would always go and ask for opinion on that, and wouldn't take it upon myself to do that. So GR5 is packaging, so special containers designed for long-term use with a product classified with that product. Example, a camera case designed for a camera, a violin case designed for a violin, and so on and so forth, right? So that's, even though it's called packaging, it's more a case, right? It's more product-specific cases as opposed to packaging, right? Most people, when they think of packaging, think of like cardboard boxes and wrapping and that kind of stuff. So it's called packaging, but if it's more like a container specifically designed for the product, like a violin case, a camera with a camera case, then they get classified under whatever the camera commodity code is or whatever the violin commodity code is, right? They're not classified separately. And then, ordinary packaging materials are classified with the goods they contain as well, right? So, for example, cardboard boxes containing electronics. You wouldn't have a separate classification for a cardboard box. And then GR6 or GRI6, subheading classification. That's used when choosing between subheadings with the same heading. So example, 6109 t-shirts, 610910 cotton t-shirts, and 610990 other textile materials. So the material determines the correct subheading. So if you're having trouble identifying the correct commodity code, you can get on to, I've given you the email addresses there and the telephone numbers. What I have on the right-hand side here is what I would use as a descriptor. So put a template together or just put an email together, but answer these questions in that email and then send the email to, depending on which customs jurisdiction you're operating out of. Send it to either tarclass@revenue.ie or send it to, if you're based in Northern Ireland or in the UK, send it to classificationinquiries@hmrc.gov.uk, right? But answer those questions for your product, give them the commodity code you're currently using, and just ask them for an opinion on it. In terms of classification, there's an awful lot of confusion where businesses think that, my customs broker looks after all of that. It's not the responsibility of the customs broker to get the commodity code correct. The customs broker will usually have you sign something called a direct representation form. That direct representation form, if you look at the writing in it, really says that they're only acting in a data input capacity. So basically direct representation means they're acting in a data input capacity. So you have to give them the information. Rarely will a customs audit lead from you, the business, to the customs broker. It will usually stop with you, the business. Okay, so it's you're responsible for giving the trader, or you, the trader, are responsible for giving the customs broker the correct information. Even if with indirect representation, so direct representation, the business, the trader, remains legally and fiscally responsible for the information on the customs declaration, providing the customs broker enters whatever information the trader gives them. Even in indirect representation, where the broker is jointly legally and fiscally responsible, and a lot of brokers won't do that, right? A lot of them will only do the direct representation. But even in that case, the trader or the business still shares responsibility. So it's very important that you get that correct. Okay. So you can go to Revenue or HMRC, you can ask them for an opinion. They will only give you an opinion, right? They won't give you any kind of a legal. So they could give you an opinion, and then you could use that code, but you could still end up being fined if it's the wrong code, right? If they've given you the wrong information in the opinion. And when you get the opinion back, it will have legal writing all over it, stating that this is an opinion only, it's not legally binding. If you want to take it a step further, you can apply for something called a binding tariff indicator, and I've given you links to how you go about that, right? So a binding tariff indicator does give you legal certainty for a period of 3 years. And you have to put in a lot more information, like you'd have to describe your product fully, send pictures of it, give more information around those 5 questions that I had in the earlier slide. And then they'll come back. It takes a while, and then they'll come back with the decision for you, which has legal standing, right? So that's good to know. Okay, so moving on to rules of origin. What is it? So rules of origin, it's the economic nationality of goods traded globally. And when I say it's economic, it's the country of origin is different to the country of dispatch, right? So you could be bringing cameras in from Asia, and those cameras get dispatched, say where they're coming from Asia, but they get dispatched from say they come from China, say, right? They get sent to Japan, but the economic nationality, they're manufactured in China, they go to Japan. There's a slight amount of processing done to them in Japan, but not enough to change the origin. And then they get dispatched to the UK. Now, the UK have a trade deal with Japan, but the origin of the goods hasn't changed. The origin of those goods is still China, right? So the economic nationalities of those goods is still China. There isn't a trade deal between either the EU or the UK with China. So therefore, there would be, the origin of those goods would remain China, and whatever duties were applicable would have to be paid. So the country of dispatch in that case is Japan, but the country of origin remains China. Okay, so it's necessary to determine the nationality of goods and able to determine duties and equivalent charges or any customs restrictions or obligations applicable to them. So the duty is applicable not based on the country of dispatch, but based on the country of origin. Any sanctions are based on the country of origin, not the country of dispatch. Any rules of import, licensing requirements, quotas, tariffs, all of that is based on the economic nationality of the goods, the origin, and not the country from where they are dispatched, right? So obviously that means that if you're importing or exporting goods, you need to know the origin of those, and you need to state it. If you're the exporter, it needs to be stated on the commercial paperwork so that the importer can see what the stated origin of those goods are and report on it correctly and meet all the necessary legal obligations around it. There are 2 kinds of origin. There's non-preferential and preferential, and the customs treatment of goods at importation is determined by the origin they have. All products have both a preferential and a non-preferential origin. So I would say that all products start out with a non-preferential origin. If there's a trade deal in place, and if the rules of origin under that trade deal are met, then they can become a preferential origin, right? But it starts, and there was a lot of confusion when the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement was first done, that there was kind of an impression that there's a trade deal now, so that means that no duties will be paid. Yes, it's great that there's a trade deal, but the trade deal is only the first part of it. The second part of it is, do I meet the product-specific rules of origin for my commodity code under that trade deal? And can I prove it, right? So it's not just that you say, yeah, I meet them. You also have to be able to prove that they are met. And it is the exporter that should be checking the rules of origin under the trade deal, and it is the exporter that should be providing the proof. And it's only once the proof is provided that the importer can do something called claiming preference, which reduces whatever duty there is down to 0%, right? Or lesser percent anyway. So again, along with classification, failure to report an origin can result in substantial liability. Look, it's not only the financial piece of it, it's dangerous if goods are coming out of, so if you're declaring the goods, the country of dispatch as the country of origin, or you're claiming country of origin, which is incorrect, goods could be, coming into the UK or into the EU that actually are coming from somewhere that do not have the same standards of manufacture, production, and there could be food products, etc. And that could damage our own internal supply chains. So it's very important that origin is declared correctly. So non-preferential merely confers an economic nationality on the goods and does not confer any benefit on them. So if it's non-preferential, then basically, it's not about a trade deal. It's just about the country from whence they're coming. So whatever the duty is, the duty is. Origin is obtained where goods are wholly obtained in one country. So there's two ways to obtain origin. One is where they're wholly obtained in one country, and I would describe that as natural products. So, for example, mineral products extracted within that country, vegetable products harvested there, live animals born and raised there. Excuse me, and then the products of live animals as well, right? So, if you're a cheese manufacturer and you use milk from cows born and raised in Northern Ireland, and you manufacture your cheese up there, then your cheese is wholly obtained in Northern Ireland. And just a very important thing about origin as well, the origin rules for Northern Ireland are tied to, because I know Northern Ireland has dual status, but the origin rules for Northern Ireland are tied into the United Kingdom. So Northern Ireland products benefit from any trade deals done, Northern Ireland originating products benefit from any trade deals done between the United Kingdom and the rest of the world, right? So a lot of the trade deals have actually carried over, there's kind of been a continuity agreement. So for example, the agreement between the EU and Canada, obviously the UK would have been part of that before Brexit, post-Brexit. That was just kind of a continuity that carried on, right? So the trade deal that was between the EU and Canada just carried on between the UK and Canada. There have been other trade deals which have been added on by the UK since, where specific terms have been negotiated separate to any of the trade deals that the United Kingdom would have availed of when it was part of the EU. So it's just important, if your goods are Northern Ireland origin, then what you're checking are the rules of origin. Is there a trade agreement between the UK and the third country that you're shipping the goods to? And what proof is required? And do you meet the rules of origin? And if you do meet the rules of origin, can you provide the appropriate proof, right? So two ways for origin. One is wholly obtained, and as I've mentioned, that's for natural products. And then the other way is last substantial transformation. So they're very complex supply chains these days, and a lot of the time there's multiple components coming from multiple territories, and then they're all manufactured or processed in together, and then you end up with a finished product. So it can be difficult to decide where is the origin in that case, right? If there's loads of components coming from different places, and some of them undergo, processing in some places and then more processing in other places, how am I supposed to know what the origin of the goods are? So the origin of the goods is obtained where the goods underwent their last substantial economically justified processing or working. And this must result in the manufacture of a new product or represents an important stage of manufacture. And it can also be used to determine origin in the context of origin marking, example, made in, i.e. Goods. So two ways for origin to be to gain origin. One is the product is wholly obtained. That's natural products. The second is, in complex manufacturing supply chains, it's the origin is a place of last substantial transformation. And how do you know If it's been, what does last substantial transformation mean? How do you know if goods have been substantially transformed? Well, that's then where the actual rules of origin come into it, right? So when you're looking at the rules of origin, so the reason you're looking at it really is to have a preferential origin, right? So one of the things you're checking is, okay, so I'm the exporter. Is there a trade deal with the country that I'm shipping to, right? So say, for example, you were shipping goods from United Kingdom, or you say you were shipping goods from Northern Ireland to Japan, right? There's a trade deal between the UK and Japan. So you would then be checking, first of all, do your goods attract duty, right? Because if they don't attract any duty, it doesn't really, you still have to state the origin of them, but you're not going to be trying to prove origin because there's no duty attracted to the product anyway. Secondly, one, it attracts duty. Two, is there a trade deal in place? So you're shipping your goods to Japan in this case, and yes, there's a trade deal in place. So then the next thing is, does my product meet the product specific rules of origin, right? And that can change sometimes, so you kind of need to keep yourself up to date on that. So you're checking, do the rules of origin apply? Can my product meet the rules of origin? Is there enough substantial transformation happening? Or are my goods wholly obtained, right? Are they natural products? There are general rules across all trade agreements, which, there are product-specific rules of origin related to products, but there are general rules across all trade agreements as well. And you will have if you understand those general rules, you'll have a very good idea as to whether your product is likely to meet the rules of origin or not for most trade agreements, right? So when you're claiming preferential origin, what is it? It's conferred on goods from particular countries when they have fulfilled certain criteria. The criteria generally demands that goods undergo more working and processing than is required to obtain non-preferential origin. Yeah, there's an economic benefit to it, right? So you need to show that the country you're claiming origin for, that their national economy was involved in the production of those goods. So if I were trying to claim EU origin or UK origin for goods that I took a full container of goods in from, I took a full container of goods in from, say, India, and then I basically handballed them off a container and repackaged them, and then I was trying to claim EU origin on those goods, then how would that, sorry, just excuse me 1 second, then I couldn't really claim EU origin in that goods because on that product, because I didn't, there was very little labor involved, there was very little machines involved in either the UK, or if we're saying for Europe, or in Europe, I didn't get the national economy involved in any way. So how can I claim origin under a trade deal that's meant to support both countries economically, right? So in that case, the origin would remain China, and I would have to pay whatever I have, the importer of those goods, when I export them, would have to pay whatever duty they have to pay. So again, that's if the goods are wholly obtained, they're natural products. There's a provision for that under most trade agreements where preference can be claimed on the duty, so the duty can be reduced or made zero based on whatever the terms of that agreement are. Preferential trade agreements include autonomous regimes. So you can either have a trade deal between multiple countries and blocks of countries, or, for example, the United Kingdom and Europe, or you can have an autonomous trade deal, which is kind of like the Generalized System of Preference, which is a trade deal done for a lot of developing countries, where they can supply into the European Union or the United Kingdom, and they will not pay duty, or the importers will pay a lower rate of duty on the product coming in. But if we export back to those countries, we pay the full duties applicable, right? So it's kind of a one-way autonomous, and the reason for that is that we're developed economies, so we need developed economies to buy our products. So we're going to help the developing countries to become more developed so that our market increases, right? So it's kind of a win-win situation for everyone. Okay. So if you want to see who the EU have trade agreements with, there's a link to it there. And then who the UK have trade agreements with, there's a link to it there, right? Preferential rules of origin are concerned with determining the nationality of goods. All preferential trade agreements concluded by the EU or UK with third countries specify criteria that must be satisfied so that the products are eligible for preferential treatment. These criteria are commonly known as preferential rules of origin. Each preferential trade agreement will have an annex containing the list of processing or working required to be carried out on non-originating materials in order that the product manufactured can obtain original status. So if I were manufacturing house alarms, say in Northern Ireland, to ship to the rest of the world, but I got components in from all over the world, right? So I got components in from Korea, I got components in from the EU, and I got components in from Dubai. So I got multiple components in from different countries. But I am then turning that into a house alarm, right? So I'm substantially transforming that, and I want to claim EU origin. I would be checking and I'm going to then imagine I'm going to take those goods and I'm going to ship them from Northern Ireland to Canada. I would be looking up the rules of the Northern Ireland, the UK-Canada agreement, and I would be looking up the product-specific rules under that trade agreement to see what do I need to meet, right? What rules do I need to meet in order that I, the exporter, can put some kind of proof of origin on the commercial invoice or the packing list that will allow for when those goods arrive in Canada that they're not going to have to pay duty, or they'd have to pay reduced rate of duty, right? I think it's all 0% with Canada, but that they're not going to have to pay duty. So that makes my landed cost less and makes me more competitive to trade with Canada, and it's more likely for me to get more business. So that's kind of in a nutshell how it all works. But in order for you, the exporter, to be able to claim, to put the statement on origin or whatever type of proof is required on the commercial invoice so that the importer can claim preference at the point of import and not pay any duty, you need to be able to stand over the fact that that you meet those rules of origin, right? Because again, if you're audited and they're going to check your commercial invoice and they're going to say, okay, so you have a statement on origin here, or you have some kind of a certificate proof of origin here. All right, so prove to me that, so what are the rules of origin for your product, and prove to me that you meet them, right? And if you have provided proof, but you don't actually know the rules of origin, or you don't meet the rules of origin, then you're in big trouble for that, right? So you have to be able to stand over it. So I'm just going to do a couple of case studies. So the wholly obtained, right? So again, that's for natural products. So natural products, wholly obtained, kind of manufactured or processed products, place of last substantial transformation is the origin. So wholly obtained, preferential origin for rye flour. So the rule for rye flour, HS heading 1102, requires that. So this is the trade agreement between the pan-European and Mediterranean countries, right? And in that trade agreement, there's a product-specific rule of origin for rye flour, and I'm a rye flour exporter in Europe, and I want to make sure that my product that I'm exporting meet the rules of origin so that I can put a statement of origin on the commercial invoice so that when that rye gets to the country that I'm shipping it to, the importer is not going to have to pay duty on that, which is going to reduce my landed costs, right? So the rule for rye flour, heading 11.1102, requires that manufacturer in which all of the cereals, edible vegetables, roots and tubers of heading 0714 or fruit are used are wholly obtained, right? So in this instance, all that my rye flour contains is rye flour. So that's heading 1102. I haven't added any sugars. 07 is sugars. I haven't added any sugars to it. So therefore, I meet the rules of origin and put a statement on origin on the commercial invoice. In this case, I am a cheese manufacturer. And again, we're talking wholly obtained here. So that's natural products. The rule for HS Chapter 04 requires manufacture in which the materials, all of the materials of Chapter 4 are wholly obtained, right? So Chapter 4 is dairy products. It covers dairy products. So what that actually means is that the dairy products must come from the country which I'm claiming origin from, right? So for the dairy products to come, that would mean the cows that the milk is coming from to make the products, we'll just say it's milk products, it's dairy cow products, then those would have to have been born and raised, right? So if I'm the PEM convention is the European one, so I would have had to have raised those cows would have been born and raised in the EU. And the cheese that I made from those cows would then be EU originating, right? And that's the rule. So manufacturing which all of the materials of Chapter 4, which is dairy, used are wholly obtained. So I'm able to export that to Switzerland as originating in the EU. And when it gets to Switzerland, the importer in Switzerland doesn't have to pay duty. And the duty on dairy can be quite substantial if goods don't qualify for it. And then we're looking at original rules of origin where it's sufficiently worked or processed. So many goods produced in the modern economy, I mentioned that earlier, that they can come from loads of different places and be processed in lots of different places. So how you decide where it's been last substantially processed is based then on the rules of origin, right? Again, you have to check the specific trade agreement to see what the exact rules of origin are. I just taken certain rules of origin that tend to be across multiple trade agreements and put them on here, right? So the main methods by which sufficient working or processing are determined are the value added method. It is necessary in this case for the value added as a result of the working or processing to constitute a certain percentage of the value of the finished product, right? So what that means is that you need to add value. In the country that you're claiming origin for, you need to add value. So if using my house alarm example, if all the components that I brought in, so non-originating components, right? So again, in that example, we'll say I'm based in Europe, and I am bringing in components to the value of €100, right? From countries outside of the Europe. So that would mean they're non-originating because they're outside the customs jurisdiction that I'm operating in. So I bring in products to the value of €100 components from areas outside of the European Union or the customs jurisdiction where I'm based. So if that was Northern Ireland, it would be outside of the UK. So if you sourced components from the EU, in that case, that you wouldn't be counting those as UK inputs. You would be adding those in as non-originating components, right? So, but the rule of origin, and I'm just explaining how the value add works. So the rule of origin could be that I have to add at least 50% value, right? So I actually sell my car alarms for 300 quid. So the non-originating components to the value of 100, I sell them for 300 quid a unit. So I'm adding more than 50% value. So that's the value add rule met in that case. There are other types of rules that can apply as well. So the manufacture process method, finished products are considered to be sufficiently worked or processed when particular specific working or processing activities are carried out. So an example of that would be yarn, where the yarn would that if I was making clothes, that I would have to turn them into the finished product. For example, a shirt from yarn, right? So it wouldn't be that I could bring in complete cotton, that you know, completely finished cotton, and turn it into a shirt. It would be that I would actually have to transform it from being yarn into the finished product before I'd be able to claim origin, right? So that's an example of a manufacturer process method. And then the change of tariff heading, where the finished products is considered to be sufficiently worked or processed when imported raw materials are classified within a tariff heading. And remember, the tariff heading is the first 4 digits of the commodity code, or chapter, that's the first 2 digits, or subheading, the first 6 digits, that is different from that of the finished product. So that would be where, and there's a good example of that coming up here, and I have examples of the other ones here, which you can go through, because you can request copies of the slides. So change of tariff heading, example, UK-Canada agreement. So the product is roasted coffee, 090121. The rule of origin is a change from any other subheading. The production example is a manufacturer in Northern Ireland imports the following non-originating materials. So coffee, non-roasted. The manufacturer in Northern Ireland is bringing in coffee 090111 from Brazil. The coffee is roasted and processed in Northern Ireland, producing roasted coffee. So HS 0901. So once the coffee is roasted, it becomes 090121. Okay, so what's interesting with this one, right? It's the subheading, a change of tariff subheading, which means that once one of the digits of the first 6 digits of the commodity code is different, then it meets the rules of origin. If it was a change of heading, it would be that one of the first 4 digits would have to be different, but this is subheading. So the roasted coffee is 090121, so that's the finished product. The raw material coming in from Brazil for it to make the coffee is 090111, right? So there's one difference of a digit. One digit is different in the first 6 digits, so therefore it's met that. The roasted coffee qualifies as UK originating, so then that producer in Northern Ireland can roast that coffee and send it to Canada under the UK-Canada agreement and claim that it's originated. When it arrives in Canada, the importer, providing the exporter has given them proof, can claim preference for it and not pay any duty. Okay, so another rule to be aware of is insufficient working or processing. So it has to go beyond all of these. I've listed them all here. It has to go beyond that. So any simple processing, doing things by hand, no machines being used, things like ironing, processing, washing, breaking up, grinding of, just simple. So very simple activities don't qualify you as originating, and you need to be careful around that. You need to be careful that you're going beyond that, basically, if you are putting a statement on origin on your commercial invoice. And again, you can go through that in your own time. So rules of origin, some other rules of origin is tolerance. So sometimes a trade agreement will say that all of this product. So for example, for the cheese, it said that all of the cheese had to, or all of the product made it, so the milk to make the cheese, all of that had to be, and sugar and whatever other products, all of that had to be originating in the EU for it to be considered originating product, right? However, a lot of trade agreements will give you a bandwidth. So they'll give you like maybe 10% to play with for that, right? So 10% of it, depending on the trade agreement, 10% of that they may perhaps some of the maybe the sugar that might go into the cheese could be non-originating, right? So sometimes there's some bandwidth, and that's called tolerance. Direct non-manipulation, non-alteration rule. So preferential trade agreements provide that preferential treatment applies only to originating products that are transported directly between the EU and the UK and the relevant third country, right? So a product loses origin if it spends time on a shelf in another country. Okay, it has to be. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't be transshipped. It can be transshipped, but it needs to kind of stay under customs territory, stay in customs territory during those processing. But you couldn't, for example, send a product from Northern Ireland, have it sitting in Dubai for a while, like for a month, and then send it to Canada, and then still claim, originating in Northern Ireland on that. It would have to go direct to Canada, right? So that's that. And then territoriality. So again, using the Northern Ireland, we'll use the Northern Ireland cheese example. So if you sent that cheese, so say the final processing and packaging of the cheese was done in, you sent that to, we'll just say for explanation purposes, you got that done in, sent it off to somewhere, let's say China, to be done, right? The final packaging aspect of it. Then that loses. You can't send it out to a country that's not part of the trade agreement for some other kind of processing to happen, and then send it to the country that the trade agreement is with and claim origin, right? So you've lost origin if you do that. Accumulation is an interesting one. So it allows a company to use materials from certain partner countries and still treat them as originating when making a product. So and again, I'm not going to go through the full example. You can do that in your own time. But if you even look at the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, in that case, under that, I could source materials from the United Kingdom, make my when I'm trying to qualify for origin under the rules of the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So say I'm exporting my house alarms back to the UK, but I source some of my products, some of the components from the UK, I can count those originating products as originating products rather than non-originating products. And by doing that, I can meet the rules where a certain percentage of my product must be made up of originating products, right? Or that a certain percentage of my products can't be made up of non-originating products. So it can help me meet the rules of origin, right? And that's generally how accumulation works. So like with the binding tariff indicator, we have got the binding origin indicator, right? And that is where you can basically have legal standing on your origin. You can do it through revenue, or you can do it through HMRC, and it's where you provide all of the information, and they will come back to you with the decision around whether you can actually claim origin on that product, and that is a legally binding decision. So that gives you some certainty as to the origin of the goods, and again, it's valid for 3 years. Okay, so I just want to talk very briefly about proof of origin. Depending on the trade agreement, there will be different proofs of origin. For the most recent trade agreements done, generally what's been accepted is a statement on origin, right? So the statement on origin allows the exporter to put a statement, so it allows them to self-certify and to put a statement on origin on their actual commercial invoice, which then allows the importer to claim preference on that. But it's done on a trust basis, right? So before you as the exporter puts that statement on origin, if that's what the trade agreement calls for, you have to make sure that you meet the rules of origin. Okay, you can't just put a statement of origin on and hope for the best. You have to make sure you meet the rules of origin, and then you put the statement of origin on there. If you're an exporter and you actually source everything from somewhere else or from from a different country, so you don't know what the components are, you don't know if the goods meet the rules of origin, then what you would do is you would request a supplier declaration from the actual manufacturer of the goods, and they would fill out a statement saying that these goods meet the rules of origin, and then you as the exporter could, based on that supplier declaration, put the statement of origin on your commercial invoice. If you're an exporter of products from the EU and the value of the products that you're exporting is over 6,000, then you need to apply to become a registered exporter. If you're an exporter from Northern Ireland or England, Scotland or Wales, that doesn't apply, right? You don't have to register for X. That's an EU system.